A bit of a comment is needed respecting these notes that I wrote and passed out. I did not create those because I'm trying to put Cleveland LF and the Smith Brothers out of business. I don't want to do any such thing. This is actually a fairly good book, and I can certainly recommend it. It's a bit on the expensive side. You can get a copy of the AARC handbook, the American Radio Relay handbook, for about the same price, and it's got about 4 times as much paper in it and about 8 times as much information. However, it doesn't address the Canadian amateur radio examination directly as this one does. My reason for writing these notes and making them available to anybody anywhere is related to some other, mainly related to some other information, which found its way to me last summer. It was, don't know where it originated, but it found its way to here from somewhere on Manitoulin Island. And the particular section there on transmission lines, which was labeled feed lines, was amazingly bad. Misconceptions, errors of all kinds, and I can't think of anything worse than someone being, especially at the beginning, fed a bunch of misinformation. That sort of thing happened to me. I remember a couple of things that I read that I took on faith, and they were wrong. One of them in particular haunted me for more than a decade before I finally found out that it was wrong, why it was wrong, and why it was right. So my primary purpose actually in doing this was more to provide a substitute for the particular section of feed lines that's turned up on this disc. I don't think the other sections, there are 8 of them all together, are as bad. I certainly hope they're not. But my impression from what I saw is that if you ever happen to come by one of these discs, the best thing to do with it, in my opinion, is to destroy it. And that's not easy to do. These discs are made of polycarbonate. And I took one of these and put it in a vise and bent it. And even when I bent it at right angles, it still didn't break off. It started to break, but it still didn't break off. But there's an easy way to make the disc unusable. Great. That's a punch a hole in it. It then cannot be read. Well, maybe parts of it can. That, by the way, is an excellent thing to do if you throw away your computer and don't want anybody to see anything you left on the hard disk. Just drill a hole through the hard disk and that's it. It doesn't matter whether somebody finds that hard disk 100 years from now, they won't be able to get anything off it.
I think I gave you that thing.
Hey?
I think I gave you that.
Yes, you did.
So I'll take it back.
If I gave it back to you, you might give it to somebody else.
I could have had fun putting a hole in it.
One of the lessons that one might learn from that is that none of this material, all 8 lessons of it, have a name on it. Nobody was willing to put the name on that, and any kind of material that comes without a name attached to it is bound to be questionable. Remember, most of the textbooks that you use in school, they have an author on them. You know who wrote that stuff. And, you know, you can, one way or another, you can get at them or her. But the internet is different. You know, stuff floats around the internet. Unidentified. You don't know where it comes from. Now that's, you know, if you go to a website like Wikipedia, that's an altogether different matter, you know. One of the really great things about Wikipedia, probably the best all around, and follow it up and go back and look at it the next day, you'll probably find that what you put in there has been thrown away and it's been restored to its original form. A reporter once did this. He created 6 errors in various pieces in Wikipedia and then sat back and watched what happened. Within 2 hours, a couple of them had already been repaired, and within 2 days, everything had been repaired. You can't do that with a book. So, when you get something that the author is not willing to show his name, tread with caution. It might be very good. It might be very bad. I've said a lot about characteristic impedance, but why does it all matter? Well, take a simple example. Supposing you have a transmitter with an output which is rated at 50 ohms impedance. Supposing you have a load, which in our case would be an antenna, which has a characteristic impedance of 50 ohms. Supposing you connect the two together with a transmission line that has a characteristic impedance of 50 ohms, you have a completely matched system, and that being as it is, you will get total power transfer from the source, the transmitter, into the antenna. If any of those 3, source impedance, the transmission line impedance, or the load impedance, the antenna, are not the same, you will get incomplete transfer of energy. In the case of energy going up a transmission line into an antenna, where did I put my brush? Boy, these just aren't the quality good old public school brushes.
Made in China.
Made where?
China.
Like everything else. Are you made in China?
Sometimes I think I am.
Back in the public school that I went to, the teachers didn't have to clean out the boards. Some poor kid was assigned to do the job. Not only clean them, wash them, so they were all sparkling clean the next morning. I don't think that happens anymore either. There's the essence of a simple dipole antenna. And let us suppose that energy is going upward. We already know that it's actually oscillating currents in the transmission line. But in terms of energy, we have energy flowing up here and into the antenna. If there is not a perfect match between these two, some of that power is reflected back down. I'll use a shorter arrow to sort of illustrate it. Bad match. I need to see. Bad match, not bad match. The worst possible case you could get is where there's no antenna here at all. In that case, all of the energy is reflected back to home line. As a matter of fact, all of the energy is reflected back down the line if either you've got an open circuit here, meaning no antenna, or if you happen to have a complete short circuit. If you're under both those conditions, all of the energy will be reflected back down the line. And we hope that doesn't happen to any of you, because it's very hard on the transmitter. Because any power that's reflected back down the line ends up getting soaked up in the transmitter. And they're capable of soaking up a small amount, maybe 5% or something like that of what they pump out. But they certainly cannot, say, a 100-watt transmitter, which is pretty much the standard in amateur radio these days for the HF frequencies. They certainly cannot stand to have all of the forward power reflected back into the transmitter. Almost all, perhaps all, transceivers presently on the market have some protective circuitry to cut down the amount of power, the forward power, the output power, in case there's too much reflected back. However, this has to be detected and action taken, and in case of a very severe reflected power, that action may not take place fast enough. It turns out that, for the most part, the old vacuum tube final amplifiers were able to withstand this sort of thing much better than modern solid-state electronics will. The amount of power that's reflected back depends on the degree of the mismatch. If you have only a fairly small mismatch, say, well, Rolly just said a moment ago, 70 ohm cable, 73 ohm cable really didn't matter. In a situation like this, a small difference like that would not result in any particular damage, but much larger amounts would. There's a way to get around that. Let's say that's your transmitter. Now, I've stuck a black box in the middle of our transmission line here. That black box is a matching network. A matching network, for these purposes, is nothing more or less than a combination of inductors and capacitors of the right value, and what that's capable of doing is matching things. All modern transmitters, transceivers, have an output of approximately 50 ohms. Very, very few antennas have, in fact, I don't know of an antenna that exists that has a characteristic impedance up here of 50 ohms. But if you insert a matching, what I intended to put there was in matching network. What a matching network does when it's properly set is take any reflected power that it sees and turn it around and send it right back upstairs. None of it finds its way through the matching network. None of it gets back to the transmitter. All is well. It's as simple as that. A very good matching network is capable of handling a tremendous variety of mismatch up here. If you happen to try to use an 80-meter antenna on 40 meters, you'll find that the impedance at the center of the antenna is in the neighborhood of thousands of ohms. And not only thousands of ohms, but a very big part of it, reactance. Not just resistance, but reactance. A good matching network will handle that. Keep in mind that a resonant antenna is only resonant at one frequency. Now it is possible to arrange your transmission line by means of fancy things called stubs and other things. You get a perfect match at one frequency, and you don't need anything in the way of an adjustable matching network. Broadcast stations do things like this, but remember, they only operate at one frequency. You, as a radio amateur, do you want to operate at only one frequency? Do you want to be locked into using just one frequency? How are you ever going to get DXCC if you're stuck on one frequency? Never ever. Most of us want to be able to operate anywhere in any band. And in fact, you can operate anywhere in any one of the HF bands, except 160 meters, but actually even that would be included, including 80 meters, 40 meters, 15, 20 meters, 15, 10, the whole bunch, with just one antenna and a good matching network. But if you want to do that, you better not use coaxial cable. The coaxial cable has too much loss. You see, when you've got a poor match, there's a lot of circulating energy in here. It's going up, being reflected, being re-reflected, and we've got a perfect match here. What is re-reflected down here is reflected back in phase with is coming in here. You might think that we'd have a situation where if the mismatch was bad enough, this would build up to a tremendous value, but it can't. Suppose this was built up to 200 watts. And 100 watts of it is reflected back. Well, we have a situation here where it would build up actually to an infinite level if there was no loss in these lines. But there's always loss in a transmission line. It's just plain resistive loss, the resistance in the wire. And there may be a small loss due to the dielectric. And with coaxial cable, that begins to be a fairly large part. So you eventually get to a point where in the case of the, say, the 200 watt situation where you're pushing 200 watts up here, but 100 watts of it is lost in this circulating situation. And so there's 100 watts coming in here, all sorts of it here, but eventually 100 watts gets into the antenna. In a situation where there was no loss, but if there's a very high loss here, you could get a situation where possibly with 100 watts here, you might only get 10 watts into the antenna, and the other 90 would be lost in this chaotic recirculation going on here. That's one of the main points made in that extra handout I gave to you, which is a reprint from QST magazine. The bottom 7 pages of that, and some of that is pretty frightening stuff, and some of that is actually, going on. The main message in that is that if you're going to try to use an antenna over many different bands, don't use coaxial cable. You've got to use a very low loss transmission line, and it turns out that open wire line of any kind of it, the very best is the oldest and most traditional transmission line used by amateurs, which is 600 ohm, and it's spaced about so wide, roughly 6 inches, and you can't buy this stuff. Nobody makes it because you can make your own. You've got to keep the spacing approximately the same, and of course, 2 wires just simply won't do that by themselves. They've got to have spacers of some kind to keep them in place. And in the old days, the traditional material used for spacers was wood, good plain old wood, but not just untreated wood. Wood soaks up dirt and water and moisture. What did the guys do? They soaked their spacers in paraffin. Why did they use paraffin? Well, because back in the old days, almost all mothers made jam, and they sealed the top of the jam with paraffin wax. You take the paraffin, you can buy it down at the store, you can still buy that stuff, you melt it in a saucepan on the top of the stove. You want to make sure you've got good circulation around because you get some toxic fumes from that stuff. Not enough to kill you, but it won't do you any good. Heat it up until it's liquid, throw your spacers in there, leave them in there for maybe a day, get them really well soaked with paraffin, and that's the sort of thing they used to use. Now a spacer that's been well soaked in paraffin now is, about as waterproof as anything you can get. I don't know of anybody who's actually using that today, but up until only a few years ago, Elmer Carr's VE3 BYR had an open wire transmission at his motel at the corner of Great Northern Road and no, it's Great Northern Road by the time you get there, and Northern Avenue, yeah, Great Northern Road and Northern Avenue. But that either fell down or he took it down a few years ago, so there's nowhere is there an open wire transmission line. But ladder line is almost as good. There's mention of using a balun to get matching, and if we had a situation where we had an antenna that had a feed point impedance of 150 ohms, if we had that, no such animal exists anywhere that I know of, but if we had that, and we're using a 50 ohm transmission line, both of them pure resistance, no reactance. We could solve two problems at once. We could use a transformer to change the impedance. I think many of you, maybe most of you, know that the impedances of a transformer go as the square of the turns ratio, so it wouldn't be hard to buy or find a transformer or even make one yourself that had the necessary turns ratio. In this case, to match those impedances, we want a ratio of 3 to 1. So if we just simply put a transformer in here, I got the ratio there on my I want more turns here than I do here. That'll accomplish the job. It'll match the impedances, but it will also do something else for you, in that the antenna is essentially by its very nature, is a balanced device. A dipole antenna is a balanced device. But a coaxial cable is unbalanced. And even if the impedance is matched, there can be problems in trying to put the two together. But in that case, the transformer becomes not only a matching network, but also an isolation device. It would then be possible to take the suppose this is your coax connector and the center conductor. Well, of course, on this side, this is a coaxial cable. We could take on the primary side here, assuming energy going upstairs, we could take and connect this to the tower. We're putting the tower up here. There are many amateurs who have towers, mainly for supporting beam antennas, the Aggies. They use them as a support, a center support for an HF antenna, or maybe more than one of them. So one could take and connect the sheath side of the unbalanced side, the sheath side of the coaxial cable, and connect it directly to the tower. No harm would come of that. It's not really necessary, but it's quite often done. Well, if you tried to do that without the transformer, you'd really screw things up. So you need to isolate the thing, and a balun will do that. I noticed in this book that it showed a balun as being built like this. This will certainly, that's a tapped transformer. That will certainly take care of your impedance matching, but that will not provide you isolation. So if you want to really go from a true balun, is able to go from balanced to unbalanced, and this arrangement is actually unbalanced to unbalanced. It's not actually a balun at all, it's an autoformer, an autotransformer. I'd rather not really say too much about baluns because I don't like them. There's really no need to use a balun to get matching. As long as you use low loss transmission line, you can achieve, along with a matching network, you can get far better results with much less loss. In fact, in those extra, in that reprint I gave you, there is a situation in there where a coaxial cable and a balun is used, which is described as the train wreck scenario. One of the worst possible combinations you can get, a situation where less than 10% of the power leaving the transmitter actually gets up to the antenna. So, well, I don't like coaxial transmission lines. I've never used one, and I like baluns even less. For a similar reason, but nevertheless, Industry Canada has some questions about baluns, and well, it will help you to pass the test if you know something about them. You don't need to tell Industry Canada that I don't like them, they don't want to know.
Yeah.
Within the question bank, reference is made a number of times to ground, but there's no clue really as to what ground is meant. For instance, there's a question, one of which I've reproduced in my Appendix A, that wants you to tell them what an unbalanced transmission line is, and one of their definitions is that an unbalanced transmission line, a coaxial cable, you connect one side to ground. You don't need to do any such thing. What they apparently mean is chassis. Now in the electronics business, ground, true ground, real ground, and chassis ground tend to be sloshed around interchangeably, and among those who know, there's no problem. Everybody knows that within the context you're talking about the chassis ground, not a real ground. For instance, in satellite transmitters, satellite transmission lines, aircraft, and even in vehicles moving along the ground, you can't possibly connect to real ground. But in all of these cases, all you really need is the chassis ground, which is just a part of the return circuit. So wherever ground shows up in any of the questions you see, assume that what they mean is chassis ground and not real ground. You do not need real ground to make any dipole antenna work. You don't need to be anywhere within miles of it. When it comes to vertical antennas, quarter-wave vertical antennas, that's another story, which I'll come back to shortly. Within these questions from Industry Canada, they also say or imply that one of the characteristics of coaxial cable is you can vary it. You certainly can. And depending upon what coaxial cable you use, you'll get away with it. But not all coaxial cable is related or is rated for outdoor use, and even less of it is rated for burial. Now, for short-term use, you can certainly take this stuff and bury it without need to worry. If the ground is dry enough and stays dry enough, you can leave it in there for years and get away with it. But most coaxial cable is not rated for outdoor use. I'm quite sure that this particular one is not rated for outdoor use. Now, if you're going to put up an antenna and you're not planning to live where you are for more than a couple of years or so, go ahead and use anything you can lay your hands on. It'll last that long. But for long-term use, you should make sure that you get coaxial cable that's rated for outdoor use. And if you're going to lay it underground somewhere where it's sopping wet, one of our members happens to live at a location where he has a large duck pond in his backyard for several months each year. If he were to be using some coaxial cable buried out there, he would need to be using coaxial cable that was rated as being waterproof, totally buriable for long-term use. And that stuff is a little bit hard to come by and is not cheap. But as far as Industry Canada is concerned, all coaxial cable is weatherproof and waterproof. And keep that in mind when you're answering the questions. For Industry Canada, you can bury any coaxial cable for as long as you want, wherever you want, whenever you want. After you get finished writing your test, come back to reality. The real life is we have to live it. Where you can buy lemonade, which doesn't have a drop of lemon in it. The closest you can come to lemon in this lemonade is potassium citrate.
I thought it was battery acid.
Hey?
Battery acid.
No, potassium citrate is not battery acid. Battery acid is sulfuric acid.
Sulfuric. Isn't there sulfuric in there?
And if you stick your foot in sulfuric acid overnight, you'll have no foot in the morning. This stuff is not nearly as bad.
No.
I don't think there's very much left here. I do have a sheet of paper here. Oh, yes. One little thing and one not quite so little thing. I mentioned that the speed of radio waves, electromagnetic waves, the speed of light. That's the speed in free space, and in our normal atmosphere, it's almost exactly the same. It's within 1% of the value it is in free space. But radio signals do not travel along transmission lines at that speed. And in tables of characteristics of transmission lines, that matter is taken care of by what they call the velocity factor. The velocity factor for most coaxial cables is 66%. This means that the signal traveling along such a coaxial cable only moves at 66% of the speed that it does out in the open air, at the speed of the radio waves themselves. Unless you're doing fancy work with what are sometimes called stubs, etc., with matching networks, which nobody does in amateur radio, all of that doesn't matter a hoot. However, there's a few questions in the test bank that refer to it, and that being the case, you need to know what it is. They also tell you that it doesn't exist in normal circuits, which is not quite true either. In ordinary circuits like audio circuits and even in HF radio circuits, propagation delay is of no concern. You know, it doesn't matter if it takes a microsecond for the signal to get from the buffer amplifier through to the final amplifier. But in microwave circuits, it does matter, because at microwave frequencies, the wavelength is very, very short. And it also matters a lot in high-speed computer circuits. propagation delay is a very critical factor in high-speed computer circuits. Maybe those aren't ordinary circuits. This matter of reflected power due to a mismatch, when you've got two kinds of wave motion traveling in opposite directions in the same medium, you always get what are known as standing waves. The total mechanism of all of this, the details of it, a complete explanation of it, would take several hours, and I'd have to hand you out a number of exercises to do, homework to take home, etc. And you wouldn't like that. What really matters, though, is that what we call the standing wave ratio, when we do have reflections, the standing wave ratio is the ratio between the maximum value and the minimum value of that standing wave. I mentioned a circumstance where you've got 100% reflection. Maybe you'd think that, well, it turns out when you get 100% reflection, that your standing wave ratio is infinite. Maybe that sounds to like it might mean that you had infinite power in your transmission line. No. Remember, it's the ratio between the maximum and minimum value, and the minimum value, in the case of total reflection, is 0. What happens when you divide any number by 0? The computer doesn't like it. It's in here. Any number at all. There's any number at all divided by 0. Whatever that number is, no matter how small or how big, the result is infinite. So, the reason you get an infinite standing wave ratio is simply because the minimum value of the standing wave happens to be 0. Of course, for all other values, it's less than that. Most transmitters can put up with, in the way of soaking up reflected power, a standing wave ratio of about 3 to 1 at a pretty much an absolute maximum. It varies between transmitters and manufacturers. You're pretty safe with values below 2 to 1, and usually with a good matching network you can do far better than that. I can get, I think, pretty well anywhere on any of the bands I operate on. I can usually get it down to 1.2 to 1 or less. And that's more than enough to make your transmitter happy and your antenna happy, and life is happy all around. The vertical antenna. The vertical antenna is sometimes called a monopole. We put it at 11 o'clock, right? 11:30. Is that tomorrow morning? We're almost finished. A vertical antenna is, an HF vertical antenna is typically mounted on the ground. And it's a quarter wavelength long. This ground is real ground, the real McCoy. with the deities and the worms and everything else that's down there. Now, of course, you can't connect your vertical antenna directly to ground. Well, if you do that, you've got a flagpole, not much else. You deliver the power to the antenna there's your transmission line. You've got a break in the antenna right at ground level. And since that quarter wave antenna is really just half a dipole, it's sometimes called a monopole. And half the length of the half wave dipole, so it's a quarter wavelength. And at that frequency, it's resonant. It turns out that the impedance, the feed-point impedance of such an antenna is approximately half that of a dipole, about 37 ohms. In this case, since the ground image, there's effectively a ground image of that there, is right there. The matter of effective ground on the antenna is essentially irrelevant. So with a vertical antenna, it has a true impedance at the feed point of approximately half of 72, about 36 ohms. 36 ohms and pretty well resistant. Well, that's not far enough away from 50 ohm coaxial cable, but what coaxial cable makes an almost ideal feed line for a vertical antenna. And also, open wire line or ladder line would not really be very suitable because, well, you're already at ground level. It wouldn't be unreasonable to just simply lay your transmission line along the ground, and you're not going to do that with ladder line or any other open wire line. With coaxial cable, no problem at all. So it's typical of an vertical antenna to use coaxial cable for the feed line, and because the feed point is accessible. It's not accessible with a dipole, it's up there in the sky. And whatever you put up there stays there. But you can get at the feed point of a vertical antenna, and it's quite common to make up the difference between its actual impedance. There's going to be a difference. And it's quite easy to include a small matching network in a box, a small waterproof box, right at the base of the antenna. And this is quite commonly done. It doesn't really have to be done. You can also use a matching network at the operating position with a vertical antenna too. Vertical antenna is a good performer, but for it to be a good performer, you need to have radials. Radials are wires spread out like the rays of from the sun, spread out from the base of the antenna, looking down from the top. You need a very minimum number of 4. And the more you have, the better. There's some guys that are going for broke. Will have, well, I've heard of cases where there are more than 100. Kind of overkill, but some guys are, well, what's a guy that's into auto racing do? He'll spend all winter working on his engine to get another extra horse out of it, won't he? There's guys doing the same thing in the amateur radio business. And that's about it.
Thank you very much, Bob. And